Mr. Luce, thank you. Ms. Salon.
Hi, my name is Lisa Seelan, and thank you so much for taking the time to hear these very critical issues on this industry. And with the passing of the state legislation that went into effect of this year, there's a lot of wonderful parts of it, but there's a lot of things that are going to end up becoming problematic as we start to put these various laws into effect. And so I come from a corporate compliance world. I'm an attorney that represents a couple dozen property compliant locations in the city of Los Angeles. I also am the general counsel to the UCBA Trade Association, which is primarily property compliant dispensaries. And I saw a need back in 2009 when I got into this industry of the lack of good business practices by a lot of the dispensaries in Los Angeles. And coming from just a corporate world, these people needed assistance in finding insurance, finding different solutions, putting everybody on payroll, how do they pay their rent, negotiating leases. So we've provided a lot of business services, and I currently represent a couple dozen of the dispensaries who have everything from health care, 401k programs, dental and vision programs for their employees, and yet they have no access to banking. Now, what a lot of my clients have had to do over the years is have management companies where they can put small quantities of cash in just so they can pay their payroll taxes, because when you're on a payroll service like ADP, the only way that they'll take your payroll taxes is through an EFT, and yet they can't put enough cash in to pay their BOE. My clients collectively just reported $42 million in gross receipts to the city of Los Angeles for the gross receipts taxes, which is close to $2.5 million of gross receipts that they paid to the city this year. None of them can pay that in cash. I mean, in a bank account. They can't do it. They have to do it in cash. It poses a huge problem to the city of Los Angeles. How are they going to collect the money? And as all these different cities are going to come online over the next several years, once the laws go into effect, how are the different business, cities going to be able to take large cash payments? So it's a trickle-down effect. It affects every aspect. It affects the landlords who don't want to take cash. It affects the state fund who doesn't want to take cash. It affects every level of this industry. And all these people would like to have is legitimate business services like any other business in this country. They want legitimacy and accountability. And with the lack of that, you have the lack of the ability to actually see how much income they're making and how much tax they should be paying. Up until 2015, July of 2015, there was one bank that was legitimately banking several of my clients. They had 10 medical marijuana businesses. They were doing an awesome job doing GARDA pickups and putting everything in through ACHs. And because of a internal banking problem they had that had nothing to do with this industry, they shut the bank down from doing the banking of this industry. They said it was way too high risk. The problem that posed is all of these clients had nowhere to go. And they were used to having this type of legitimacy. And since then, again, what we were just talking about was, where do you store all this cash when you have to make a $100,000 payment or a $50,000 payment to the BOE on a monthly basis? How do you pay your payroll when you have 30 or 35 employees on your payroll? It is a huge problem. And the biggest problem is part of the law that just was passed has distribution centers and transporters. And if all these distribution centers can only accept cash and these transportation companies are taking cash payments, it's going to be a huge public safety risk for everybody that's going to be coming into this industry once the MMRSA goes online. So we have huge problems looking forward that if hopefully we can start working on solving today. Everybody knows it's a federal problem, but I think our state, being the 7th largest economy in the world, could maybe come up with a solution. There's a lot of people here that would like to come up with some, panel talks and maybe some working solutions for it. I don't have the answers, but it's a huge problem for this entire industry. And I really appreciate you looking into it this early on, and hopefully we can work together to come up with something that will work for the state and for the local governments. And thank you so much.
Ms. Ceylon, thank you so much. Mr. Allen.
Yes, thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for this opportunity. I think that the crisis has been very well framed at this point. I think Commissioner Owen did a wonderful job. My colleagues on this panel have further reiterated that. One of the underlying points of this conversation we're having regarding regulating this industry is a basic reality that I think we can all agree on. The status quo is not working. Something needs to give. This is a federal issue. There's nothing that we can do directly to solve the big picture issue here that any of us have thought of yet. If anyone on the committee has an idea, we'd love to hear it. That said, this is an unfortunate dark cloud over what is a very exciting time in California. On the back of historic bipartisan legislation that was nearly 2 decades late, California is witnessing the emergence of an industry, not because new businesses are being formed, not because there's any new opportunity, but because existing businesses, some of them decades or generations old, finally have the opportunity to come out to publicly discuss the challenges that they have as business owners. And what I'm going to focus on today is the importance of ensuring that as this regulated marketplace emerges, the inability to access banking resources does not become an unfair impediment or barrier to entry into the marketplace. A recent article published on Leafly, a website focused on this marketplace, on December 30th, has a quote that says, "Accounts exist for those who are willing to find them and pay for them." And so there are solutions, there are creative workarounds. But the problem is particularly acute for small businesses and for farmers. The agricultural community has always had challenges with the financial community, owing to high transactional costs, rural communities, and the nature of these businesses. On the flip side, small businesses that are not well capitalized and are not doing the volume of transactions are going to have a harder time paying for expensive solutions. There are no solutions here at the state level. We do need the Fed to act. There is a lot, I think, that this body can do to push those solutions at the federal level. Never missed the opportunity to applaud last year's work on AJR 25. It was fantastic to see that resolution move, calling on the federal government to find solutions for this. I would encourage more actions in that direction. Anything that you as a legislature can do to keep the pressure on the federal government is much appreciated from our perspective. However, we do have an immediate problem. We do have an urgent need to help our community of businesses here in California participate in the regulated marketplace. We've talked a lot about the Board of Equalization payments because that's where we have experienced the challenge of these large cash payments. When we look forward to 2018 and the advent of state licenses, we're looking at several agencies. Our county ag commissioners going to be able to hold several thousands of dollars per fee in rural counties where we're expecting hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants. Our state and regional water boards going to be able to hold the cash required. A pilot program on the North Coast has the highest fee level set at $10,000. We had 52 applicants in the initial application period. It's quite a bit of cash for a regional water board to be holding. There are a lot of ways that this problem is going to be enhanced and exacerbated as the regulatory framework moves forward. And what I'd really like to explore together with this committee, with the other stakeholders, with the banking community, and with state regulators is ways that the state of California can ensure that those fees and paying those fees are accessible to all businesses, to ensure that there is a way to comply with requirements that will be coming online. The long-term solution is clearly in Washington. It's clearly going to involve a dynamic coalition of banking industry, cannabis industry, and state governments working together in Washington, D.C. to make progress on this larger issue. But in the immediate term, we absolutely have to find pathways for small businesses and the agricultural community in this marketplace to participate in the regulated marketplace by ensuring that fees can be paid safely, by ensuring that state regulators and agency staff are safe in keeping these fees, And I really do want to reinforce what Lisa Silan said in her comments, that there are a lot of great minds in this state, and we really can provide immediate relief in the immediate term while we look for those longer-term solutions. And I look forward to being part of that process. Thank you all very much for the opportunity.
Do we have any questions from any of my colleagues? Ms. Bonilla.
Thank you very much, and is my mic on? Good. Thank you very much for this information, and I look forward to the next panel as well. But I seem to hear that we need some kind of solution, and I understand, though, from the first speaker, Sean, that you were like, let's just go for the federal option, which is years. We can all agree, years in the future. And I'm interested, I have a spot bill, AB 2149, and looking at an interim relief. I wouldn't call it a solution. And so I was just curious about whether you agree that we do need to do something, particularly around the collection of fees, licenses, tax monies, or if you would see that somehow as getting in the way of a federal answer.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you that we need relief in the immediate and on the local level here. So I wouldn't say just wait for that federal change. I think my main form of cautioning there was to not lock in these sort of alternative systems.
Mandating,
Yeah,
right.
right,
But as some kind of mechanism that people could choose to use. So it's really the mandate you didn't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. No, I appreciate that information, and hopefully we can continue to work on what will work for BOE, for different agencies, and also for the industry as well, and come up with at least something that will work while we wait for the federal government to act. Thanks.
I had one question, and this could either go to Mr. excuse me, Mr. Lewis or Mr. Allen. We've talked in the opening statements we've heard from a number of other people during meetings we've conducted the last couple of months that a number of the different dispensaries and businesses involved have had to basically create front companies to be able to pay payroll, store money, just engage in normal legal business activities. This obviously puts them at a lot of risk. It puts the banks that are holding these accounts at risk. Do you have any comments on that? I mean, obviously, that's kind of a situation that isn't obviously, one, legal, or two, something that these businesses want to engage in, but out of desperation, they've done this. Any thoughts on some of the testimony we've heard on that before?
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in on that to say that, I think what some people are doing is, like was mentioned previously, are setting up these management companies, to manage certain functions for the dispensary, So I think there's certainly an argument that can be made that could be done legally if you have a legitimate management company that's not just a front for this one dispensary. But yeah, it is definitely a desperate tactic and not something that you want to do. I think what you also see is a lot of people trying to not have a separate company, but really also just try to obscure the true nature of their business, and maybe not be completely honest with a banker when they go in there and try to open that account. So those are some of the two biggest things that we see people, getting some access, but not in the right ways.
I can speak to my personal experience. Until 2012, I was a commercial grower. And this is the best possible pathway. For me, it was a civic duty. To pay those taxes, and there really was no other option. And as we look at the future of this industry and we see the emerging legitimate nature and regulated, ultimately a regulated marketplace is going to serve the public interest and the business community. That's the beauty of this win-win that we find ourselves in. Moving away from the dishonesty that the industry has been forced to operate in, moving away from that challenge that we all deal with of being forced to essentially commit crimes in order to live up to our civic duty as well as best practices within the marketplace is I think, a travesty. And that really is, on a personal level, and for many of my board members and members, it's that lack, it's the inability to be honest and open and to just follow the rules that is so painful. I mean, obviously, in addition to the public safety and in addition to just the risk there, it is a very real and common problem that business owners are forced to be dishonest in order to live up to best practices.
And then the only other problem with some of these management companies is you still, even if you're doing everything 100% correctly, filing the tax returns for the management company, filing the tax returns for the dispensary, you still are very limited as to how much cash you can put in any bank account before a bank will shut you down. And attorneys get their bank account shut down. I've had mine shut down because I get paid in cash. So it's a huge trickle-down effect to just not the actual business itself, but as your business is growing, what Hezekiah was saying before and what Sean was saying before, as you're growing your business and all of a sudden you are making money, and even though it's a nonprofit, you still are seeing sometimes 200, 300, 400 patients a day. The quantity of cash coming through your accounts and the amount of payroll taxes and the different things you need to pay is greater than you can put in any management account. So it is a huge situation, and I have clients that just want to pay their bills and they can't, and it's a frustration. And everybody says, when are you going to get us a bank? I said, well, I don't have a magic wand, but I wish I could just say, poof, here's your bank. And I mean, hopefully we can do something without relying only on the federal government to solve this for us.
I guess just one question, follow up on that, little different nature. In a number of the meetings I've had, two things have come up. One, because of the nature of having that much cash on hand and being obviously a security risk and a risk to the neighboring businesses, and obviously it makes it a target. It also has been told me that it makes it a target for other money laundering operations that sometimes can be funneled through these types of businesses. It also serves as a deterrent for people that would be paying taxes or fees to not do so. I mean, it seems like local municipalities in the state are big losers as long as we continue this business, not just in the hassle of having someone show up with $200,000 in cash to pay their state taxes, but also because it seems to discourage people from wanting to even engage in going down the path of actually being honest and paying what they owe. What type of work as an industry, and this can be open up to anyone, is being done to prevent other types of operations from moving in, taking over, obviously, these businesses and using them for fronts for other types of money laundering?
One of the other overarching themes from our perspective of this emerging regulated framework is a distinction between criminals and business owners. And over the last several months since the legislation was passed and ultimately signed, from my perspective, having been all over the state talking to business owners, there is a real enthusiasm to be on the right side of that distinguishing line. And obviously, money laundering for other activities will remain criminal, regardless of what happens with the regulation for this particular marketplace. And so I think that the most important thing that we can do is to make compliance with the regulations, A, feasible. Let's not let this financial challenge we're having be a barrier to entry. And two, make it as welcoming and safe as possible for those businesses when they do cross that line. These business owners are taking tremendous risk. And so from our perspective, what we are doing is A, offering that promise of being on the right side of the line as a preferred alternative. You do want to be on the business owner side of the line. And secondly, doing everything that we can to raise the issue, and which is why we appreciate the opportunity so much today to be able to talk about these challenges we're facing.
Well, thank you for that answer. I do want to thank all three of you and all three of your associations for the work you're doing. We'll look forward to working with you more in the future. Before we go to our next panel, I see we have one of my colleagues, Assembly Member Wood is here. Would you like to give any opening statements or comments? I know you've done quite a bit of work in this area and authored part of the package last year that is leading to our discussion today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for being a little late and running up the stairs and losing my breath here. But I think one of the things that actually having studied this issue and actually gone to Colorado to learn more about it, and speaking to the credit union that was working on trying to create a state chartered credit union there, it's extremely complicated, and I think one of the angles that I think is going to be important going forward is obviously a hugely cash intensive business. So I would like to see us begin to look for focusing on how we actually reduce the cash. And actually looking, and that's why the electronic component of electronic cash or electronic transfer of funds is so absolutely critical. So rather than focusing on the amounts of cash, how do we reduce that amount of cash? And when you start thinking about the MMRSA and implementation going forward, in reality, probably no businesses with cannabis should have any banking activities currently at all, if we're following the federal guidelines. So those who do, I wonder how many. I wonder if those banking institutions really know that they're banking cannabis, and some of them I do. I know in my county, and I think you're going to hear from Southern Humboldt Credit Union, they are banking, and there are some very, very strict guidelines about how they're doing that. But I do wonder about that going forward, and I do wonder if. And I lost my train of thought, which is not a good thing here when you run up the stairs. But it is hugely challenging, going forward. And I think that as you look at the amount of cash, and as you look at all the potential licensing that we're going to go through, in reality, the way we are now, all those license fees to all those agencies are going to have to be paid in cash. So is the Department of Public Health, is DCA, is CDFA prepared to handle those cash transactions? And I would guess to say they're probably not. And so how do we do that going forward? That's going to be a big, big challenge. How do you actually collect all these fees in cash? And we know, and I apologize for coming in, so I don't know all the testimony, but you hear stories about BOE collection of tax payments that come in at $400,000 that take 4.5 hours to count. And so I apologize if that's a repeat for anyone, but it is a challenge. So I would be looking a little differently at this, and how do we reduce the actual amounts of cash that's actually changing hands, and looking at electronic transfers, and that's obviously going to have a huge impact on how if the federal government actually steps in and helps out on this. So thank you. I apologize for being a little out of wind.
Not at all, Mr. Wood. Thank you so much for being here today and your work on this issue. That's actually a perfect segue into our next panel, non-bank alternatives. Can we get David Denberg, founder and CEO of Kind Financial, Larry Littman, head of Treasury and Cash Management, American X Ace Pay, and Lance Ott, CEO of Guardian Data Systems. Thank you all three for being here. And Mr. Denberg, if you'd like to start this panel, because we are running a little late, we're going to ask each of the presenters to try to keep it to 4 minutes, but we won't stop you if you go a little bit over.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, thank you for having us today. It's a great honor to be here today because it's an amazing phenomenon what's happening not only in California but in the country. And to have the opportunity, like you guys are doing this the right way, believe it or not, which is you've had an industry for several years at this point, but now you're getting ready to do rules and regs, and you're dealing with banking up front, which is, you should be credited for that. Most states in the country, out of the 24 that have passed medicinal marijuana laws, forget the 5 states that have recreational, haven't really dealt with the banking issue. They've created an industry and tried to hide away from the problems that it causes. So before I go into what my company does, I want to congratulate the state of California for taking this initiative and working on it very hard and very closely, and including the industry people themselves. One thing about banking that I've learned over the last 2.5, 3 years of starting my company and going into the market, which is banking is not a privilege. I mean, banking is not a mandated thing the federal government gives you. Banking is fundamentally a privilege. I never really realized that. When I turned 18, I opened my first bank account, and my paychecks all went in there and so forth, and really never thought about how lucky I was to have a bank account. Until I saw a 60 Minutes episode in October of 2012, and that was my foray into this industry. At that point, there was 16 states and $1 billion of revenue. But in that program, it specifically spoke about the lack of financial services and no banking, everything was in cash and no credit cards. And that really was the catalyst for why I'm here today, 3.5 years later. Kind Financial is a full-service financial services company catering to the legal cannabis industry. We provide those services primarily through technology. We have several lines of business, or a few lines of business. We have a track and trace seed-to-sale software program that follows the life cycle of the flower from the day it's planted by seed or by clone all the way to the day that it's sold at the point of sale. We also have a cash management division, which utilizes the famous kiosks that's been spoken about here so far today. Let's talk about the kiosks. I'm not a huge proponent of a kiosk. But when you step back and think about it for a second, we use kiosks all the time. We use them at the airport. We use them at movie theaters. I'm not even sure people realize they're even using a kiosk when they use a kiosk. But I will tell you this. I travel the country speaking to banks, speaking to businesses, and speaking to different state houses in the country. And I'll tell you this. Banks right now, for good or for bad, like kiosks. They are secure. They're safe. It takes the cash out of the retailer's hands, first of all. It takes away from shrinkage. And it's secure. It is a secure way to handle the cash in today's environment. We also are partners in a company called Link to Banking. A lot of people don't know companies like this exist, and everyone really should. Link to Banking is led by an ex-federal regulator from FinCEN, as well as an ex-banker, certified money laundering specialist, and data specialist. And what that company does is goes into banks. We have clients. We have banks taking deposits, okay? They go in, they evaluate the bank's AML BSA program, they set up the cannabis compliance program, and then through technology, both software and hardware, we give them the tools that enables the bank to bank this industry confidently and safely. Several people have spoken today, and everyone is right. I don't want to say that anyone's wrong. Everyone's right. This is a very personal topic. The problem in the state of California fundamentally is California lacks the laws. It lacks the robust laws that we need to bank the industry. Fundamentally, that's problem number one in this state. It will always be a federal issue until the federal government decides to deal with this. And even when they decide to deal with it, if they tomorrow decided to legalize or to create cannabis banking, you're talking 2 to 5 years of rules and regs and compliance and how that's going to work in the country. The day they pass the law does not mean you go to Bank of America the next day and open your checking account if you're in cannabis. That's not going to happen. There's going to be robust compliance procedures and laws and rules and regulations that are going to go along at the federal level. So we do need to deal with the problem today. And companies like Link to Banking, and there's other companies out there, there's companies like Kind Financial that do provide the access, security, transparency, and compliance that enables banks, growers, dispensary owners, manufacturers, ancillary businesses in the cannabis industry obtain bank accounts.